I wasn't even on the original guest list. The plan was simple. He and his old college buddies were doing a weekend camping trip in the woods, just like they used to. I only got invited because someone else dropped out at the last minute, and he texted me, casual as ever, "Got a spare spot? Wanna come?" I stared at the message longer than I should have. My thumb hovered. I almost said no. Too much time alone with him was dangerous. But I replied with a thumbs up and a sure, pretending I didn't feel anything at all. The morning we left, the sun hadn't fully risen yet. Dew clung to the grass like a whisper, and his car already sat in my driveway, engine running, passenger door open like a quiet invitation. He gave me that easy grin as I tossed my duffel in the back. "Still a night person, huh?" he teased. "You look like you just crawled out of a grave." I shrugged, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "Better than crawling back into one with you." We both laughed, and for a while it was just that, simple, comfortable. Like nothing between us had changed since high school. Like I didn't carry around this invisible weight every time he leaned too close or touched my shoulder like it meant nothing. The road stretched on endlessly, winding between pines and fields and gas stations that hadn't seen upgrades since the 90s. Music played low on the stereo, his usual mix of classic rock and indie folk. He tapped the steering wheel with his fingers, humming sometimes, his voice just under his breath. I watched him when I thought he wouldn't notice. The curve of his jaw, the way he pushed his sunglasses up with one hand and scratched at his stubble with the other. Small things, stupid things, but they stuck. At one point, the wind rushed in through the open windows, and he reached over to crank it up again. As his arm brushed mine, he glanced at me, half-smile forming. "You okay back there, fifth wheel?" I smirked. "Thanks for reminding me I wasn't actually invited." He laughed. "You're always invited. You know that." I nodded, but I didn't say anything. Because what could I say? That sometimes I wish I wasn't just the buddy? That sharing a tent with him would undo months. No years of silence I'd forced myself to keep. That every laugh, every shared glance, every goddamn ride like this made it harder to pretend. The further we drove, the fewer houses we saw. Just trees now. Thick, wild trees that swallowed the road and made everything else feel far away. Isolated. Like the world had narrowed to just this car. Just this moment. He turned down the music and said, more softly this time, "Glad you came." I looked at him then. Really looked. His eyes flicked to me for a second, then back to the road. And just like that, something shifted. I don't know what it was. Something in the air, or maybe just the way he said it. Like it meant more than the words themselves. My throat tightened. I turned to the window and watched the blur of trees fly past, pretending I wasn't affected. But I was. God, I was. That smile, the one he gave me just before we hit the first turnoff toward the woods, stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. The sun was already sinking when we reached the site. Pine trees stretched tall and still, the last bit of light clinging to their edges like gold dust. The others had claimed their spots already. Scattered tents, crackling fires, laughter echoing through the clearing. We parked near the edge, where the ground sloped down to a stream. He popped the trunk and tossed me my bag. "Let's get ours up before it gets dark." Ours. I didn't think much of it until I unzipped the rental bag and pulled out one tent, one sleeping bag, no extras. I glanced at him. I think there's been a mistake." He looked over, brows knitting as he inspected the gear. "Seriously? They gave me the solo pack." He rubbed the back of his neck and let out a breathy laugh. "Great." I laughed too, a little too quickly. "Guess we're getting real cozy tonight." He smirked and bumped my shoulder. "Just like old times. Remember that lake trip senior year?" Yeah, I remembered. I also remembered pretending to be asleep while listening to the rhythm of his breath from 2 feet away and wishing I could tell him what I felt without breaking everything. We pitched the tent fast, half in silence, half in casual jokes about being underprepared. The sky deepened to navy, and the firelight from the others barely reached us out here. It felt separate, almost intentional. Inside, the tent was just big enough for 2 people who didn't mind touching. The sleeping bag lay unzipped, spread out beneath us like a shared bed. He kicked off his shoes and climbed in first, hoodie still on, hands behind his head. "You good?" "Yeah," I said, slipping in beside him. The fabric was cool. His body wasn't. For a while we just lay there. The wind outside rustled the trees like whispers. "I forgot how quiet the woods get," he said, voice soft. "Yeah." I stared at the nylon ceiling. "You hear everything." He shifted. The sound of his jacket brushing against mine was deafening in the stillness. I turned slightly, facing the tent wall. My shoulder brushed his. I didn't move away. The heat from his body seeped into mine, slow and steady. My mind wouldn't shut up. His thigh was nearly against mine. His breathing had changed, no longer deep and even like someone drifting off. Shallower now, measured. I closed my eyes, tried to slow my pulse, tried to forget how close his hand was to my side. And then a shift, barely anything. His arm moved, sliding lightly until his forearm rested against my back. Not pressing, just there. I didn't breathe. He didn't move. Seconds passed. Then more. Too many for it to be accidental. I could feel his fingers, just grazing the hem of my shirt. His skin warm even through the fabric. My mind was on fire, but my body stayed still. Was this happening? Was I imagining it? And if I turned around, would he pull away? Would he look at me like I'd made something up? Like I'd ruined the comfort of years for nothing? His hand didn't leave. It stayed. Light, steady, familiar in the strangest, most intimate way. I kept my back to him, eyes wide open, and I waited. The fire had burned out sometime after midnight. What little warmth it had offered faded into the cold air that pressed in from every corner of the woods. Our tent stood like a fragile barrier between us and the chill outside, and still, he radiated heat beside me. Couldn't sleep. Not with the way my mind kept circling back to the weight of his arm from earlier. How it had rested along my back just a moment too long. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it was just him shifting, getting comfortable. But I couldn't convince myself of that, no matter how hard I tried. He hadn't moved away. That part stayed with me. Outside, the trees swayed with a low creaking sound, the wind threading through pine needles in a breathy hush. Inside, the tent was silent except for the sound of his breathing. Shallow, controlled, awake. I stared at the ceiling, though there was nothing to see. Just the vague outline of mesh above us and shadows dancing in patterns I didn't dare define. I didn't turn, didn't speak. I just lay there listening to the space between us. Then slowly he shifted again. I felt it before I heard it. The press of his leg brushing mine. The subtle tightening of the bag beneath us. And then his hand. Found the curve of my lower back. Just barely. Fingers grazing the hem of my shirt. I froze. His hand lingered. Hesitant. Light. But deliberate. I held my breath. Every nerve in my body seemed to lean toward that single point of contact. Skin prickling with anticipation. Confusion. Fear. I told myself not to read into it. To stay still. Let it pass. But my heart was racing. Loud enough I was sure he could hear it. And then it happened again. His fingers brushed lower this time, more sure. Soft, almost reverent, like he was testing the water but already knew how warm it was. Still, he didn't speak. Neither did I. But the air between us changed. Thickened. My skin buzzed with tension. My eyes burned with the effort to keep them open, to stay in control. He moved closer, not suddenly, but slowly. So gradually it felt like a tide coming in. His thigh pressed against mine. His chest lightly touched my shoulder. And his hand stayed. I could feel the heat of his breath now, warm and steady against the back of my neck. My mind screamed to say something, anything, but my mouth wouldn't move. I didn't know what this was. A mistake? A dream? A truth he'd kept as hidden as I had? I squeezed my eyes shut. Every second felt like an hour. The night stretched out in front of us like it might never end. And then he exhaled, soft, shaky, like maybe he was scared too. I thought of all the years we'd known each other. Of every moment I'd brushed aside a look, a touch, a word that could have meant more. And now here we were, pressed close under the same thin tent wall. No one watching, no one to stop whatever this was becoming. His fingers moved again. Upward this time, gentle along my spine. My breath caught in my throat. Still, we said nothing. Because words would change it. Words would make it real. And maybe neither of us was ready for that yet. So I stayed still. Let the silence hold us. Let the questions hang unanswered in the air. But I didn't move away. His fingers moved with hesitation at first. Barely a touch, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to want what he was doing. My breath caught the second his palm slid over my side, resting there as if waiting for me to pull away. I couldn't. The heat from his skin burned through the cotton of my shirt. My pulse thundered against my ribs, each beat faster than the last. I stared straight ahead, eyes open in the dark, heart pounding like I was standing on a cliff's edge and he had just taken my hand. His palm flattened, inching up my chest. It wasn't rushed or bold, just careful, unsure, like he was afraid of breaking something. His breath was close now, warm on the nape of my neck, the kind of warmth that melted into your skin and stayed long after the air had gone still. I swallowed hard, but the lump in my throat didn't go away. Part of me whispered to stop this. Say something. Turn around and ask him what he thought he was doing. Ask him what this meant. But the louder part, the one that had spent too many nights wondering what it would feel like to be this close, silenced everything else. I let him touch me. His hand trembled as it slid across my chest, fingertips dragging slowly, carefully, like I was something sacred. His lips were near now, barely brushing the curve of my shoulder. I felt him inhale against my back, felt the heat of it sink into me. I closed my eyes, not from shame, not from guilt, but because the sensation was too much and not enough at the same time. He shifted closer, one leg pressing against mine. I didn't move. He could have pulled away at any second. I think part of him expected me to flinch, to recoil, to laugh or freeze or break whatever spell we were wrapped in. But I stayed. And then his fingers slipped beneath the edge of my shirt.
Bare skin.
His hand paused there, not pushing further, just resting. Waiting. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That was enough. That was permission. We didn't say a word. Not one. The silence between us was heavy but tender, like it had its own kind of language we didn't need to translate out loud. I turned a little, just enough to let him know I was here. Not frozen, not passive, just as awake and aware as he was. My hand found his arm, fingers curling around the curve of his wrist. He stilled for a moment, then exhaled into the space between us. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't graceful. He moved like he was afraid of doing it wrong, and I responded like I couldn't believe this was real. There were pauses, adjustments, slight missteps, but it was honest. His hand slid up to my jaw, thumb brushing my cheek like he was memorizing me. He leaned in closer, his forehead barely touching the side of mine. His breath trembled as it left his lips, and I could feel how fast his heart was beating, like mine. The moonlight filtered through the fabric of the tent, pale and thin, casting silver-blue shadows across his face. I caught glimpses of his expression. Eyes half-closed, lips parted, brow drawn tight in focus and feeling. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't burying what I felt. I wasn't wondering what if. I was here, with him. And when it was over, when our hands had found stillness and our breathing had returned to normal, he pulled away. Slowly, quietly. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. He turned onto his back, facing the tent ceiling, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that didn't match mine. I stared at his silhouette, the shape of him cut out in moonlight and shadow. I wanted him to look at me, to say something, but he didn't. I lay there, the space between us widening again. The tent felt smaller and colder. The silence wasn't tender now. It was thick with unspoken things. Things I didn't know how to ask. Things I wasn't sure he was ready to answer. He was 2 feet away, and it felt like miles. His eyes met mine for the briefest second, then flicked away like it had burned to hold my gaze. He didn't say good morning. Not to me. The rest of the day blurred. We hiked, ate granola bars, told stories around the fire again. He was loud, animated. Too much. He nudged someone else's shoulder the way he used to do with me. Laughed at everything like it wasn't strained. I tried to match his energy, to pretend the night before hadn't happened. But everything felt wrong now. Every brush of his arm made my skin flinch. Every time he stood too close, I stopped breathing. I kept searching for a signal in his face, but all I got were walls. That night, back in the tent, it was colder. He crawled in after me but stayed on his side, zipped into the edge of the sleeping bag like we were strangers. His back to me, no touch, no words. I stared at the ceiling again, my body tense and burning with everything we hadn't said. Did he regret it? Was it a mistake? Had I misunderstood everything? I couldn't breathe in that tent. The air felt tight and too quiet, so I slipped out. The forest was dark but familiar now. I followed the faint path toward the river, the one we'd passed earlier. My boots sank into the damp earth, and my hands dug into my pockets to stop them from shaking. When I reached the water, I sat on a flat rock and let my feet dangle. The river whispered like it knew something I didn't. I stared at my reflection until it blurred. My chest ached with the weight of things I hadn't asked. Footsteps crunched behind me. I didn't turn. He sat down beside me, a careful distance away. Neither of us said anything at first. Just the sound of water, trees, the occasional call of a bird overhead. Then he said, "It's cold out here." I gave a small nod, eyes fixed on the water. Couldn't sleep. I closed my eyes, not because I was tired, but because I didn't know what else to do with the ache that had started blooming quietly in my chest. Morning came like a slap. The sun filtered through the thin fabric of the tent, casting sharp lines across the sleeping bag. My eyes opened to the sound of footsteps and distant voices. Someone was already poking at the fire outside. I turned over slowly. He was gone. His side of the sleeping bag was empty, still faintly warm. The zipper was half undone, like he'd slipped out in a hurry. I lay there a few more seconds, my chest tight, staring at the empty space where he'd been just hours ago. Part of me hoped he'd come back, that maybe he'd smile like nothing had changed, or maybe like everything had. But he didn't come back. When I finally stepped out into the crisp morning air, he was already with the others, tossing a bag of trail mix at someone, cracking a joke that made everyone laugh too loud for this early. He didn't even glance my way. I stood there for a second, unsure of what to do. Then I forced my legs to move, joining the group like nothing inside me was unraveling. "Hey, you sleep okay?" someone asked. "Yeah," I lied, voice thin. He shifted. I felt him glance at me, then away. He stopped, then cleared his throat. The firewood ran out too fast. I thought we had more. It wasn't what I expected. Just small talk. Meaningless. But I went along. "Yeah, we should have brought extra." Silence again. He kicked a small stone into the river. I watched the ripples fade. I wanted to ask what last night meant. Why he left. Why he wouldn't look at me. But my mouth wouldn't form the words. Instead, I asked, "You think the others noticed anything weird today?" He hesitated.
No.
Why would they? I didn't answer. Just let the question hang there, pointless. The river kept moving. He kept staring at it. I did too. And that was all we gave each other. Not the truth. Not what either of us really needed. Just surface-level words skimming over something much deeper underneath. Eventually, we stood and walked back to the tent. Still no answers. The last night crept in without warning. We'd eaten by the fire, listened to stories we'd all heard before, laughed at jokes that didn't quite land. Everyone was pretending nothing was different. But I felt it. The way he kept stealing glances at me across the flames. The way I kept looking away too fast. One by one, the others slipped off to their tents, until only the coals remained, glowing faintly. I stayed behind, pretending to watch the embers fade. My hands were tucked in my sleeves, half from the cold, half to stop them from shaking. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. He didn't sit, just stood beside me, staring down at the fire like it might explain something we hadn't figured out. "You cold?" he asked. Not really, I lied. He hesitated, then said, Can we talk? My heart gave a quiet lurch. I nodded, but it took a second before I could stand. My legs felt heavy as I followed him toward the tree line, just far enough from camp that no one would hear. The woods were dark and still. A low wind stirred the leaves overhead, but everything else was quiet. He stopped, turning to face me. The light from the fire didn't reach us here, but the moonlight caught in his eyes, silvering the edges. I've been trying to figure out what to say, he began, voice low, and I still don't really know how. I waited. He rubbed the back of his neck, then let his hand fall. That night, in the tent, I didn't plan that, I swear. I swallowed hard, unsure if he was apologizing or confessing. It was late. We were close, and it felt like something I couldn't ignore anymore. His words stumbled out, like he'd rehearsed them and forgotten the lines. I didn't mean to put you in a weird spot. God, I've been feeling stuff for a while, but I didn't get it. I didn't want to get it. I looked at him. His shoulders were tense, his mouth drawn tight. He finally met my eyes. I thought maybe you hated me. I couldn't even look at you the next morning because I thought, if I saw your face, it would be different. Like I'd ruined it. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I needed a moment to steady the flood rising in my chest. Then I said softly, I don't hate you. His breath hitched. He looked like he hadn't let himself hope for that. I never hated you, I added. I was just scared too, and confused. And I paused. I'd thought about it before. But I told myself not to. Why? He asked, barely above a whisper. Because I didn't think you'd ever feel the same. And because I didn't want to lose what we had. He exhaled shakily, as if he'd been holding something inside for too long. Me too. The space between us was small now. Not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. He reached out, then stopped, like he was checking for permission. His hand hovered near mine, then gently, hesitantly, touched it. And for the first time, it didn't feel like an accident. My fingers curled around his. No words, just that quiet connection, simple, but full of everything we hadn't said until now. The wind rustled again, and this time it felt softer, like the night had shifted, like something that had been wound too tightly was finally starting to loosen. We didn't kiss. We didn't cry. We just stood there, hand in hand, as if that alone could explain everything we were finally beginning to understand. We didn't go back to the fire. The others were asleep, the woods silent except for the wind brushing through the trees and the occasional crack of cooling embers. We walked back to the tent without a word. No brushing shoulders. No lingering glances. Just quiet steps in sync. Inside, the darkness felt less heavy than before. He lay down first, folding the edge of the sleeping bag over his shoulder, then left space for me. I slid in beside him, not touching but not distant either. The moonlight filtered in through the mesh roof above us, casting faint patterns on the nylon walls. I stared up through it, past the netting to the dark sky overhead. A few stars blinked through the branches. I heard him breathe in, hold it, let it go, and then he whispered, How long? I turned my head slightly toward him. Since high school, probably. He didn't respond at first, just shifted a little, his arm brushing the edge of mine. I thought it was just me, he said finally, voice low and unsure. But then I convinced myself it was nothing, that I'd made it up. I nodded slowly. Same. The silence returned, but it was softer now, like a blanket rather than a wall. I don't know what this means, he said. I don't have a label for it. For me. For us. You don't need one, I murmured. I just needed you to be honest. And you were. He turned onto his side, his face close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath when he spoke. Do you think this will mess everything up? I thought about that, about what it had been like to hold all of it in for so long. The tension, the second guessing, the nights pretending nothing was there when it was all I could think about. I used to think it would, I said. Now I'm not so sure. Maybe it just changes it. His fingers found mine under the fabric. No pressure, just that quiet closeness again. I want to try, he whispered. I don't know how or what that even means yet, but I don't want to ignore it anymore. That was enough. We lay there for a long time. Neither of us moved. Neither of us needed to. The fire outside had gone cold, but inside the tent, something had started. Small, quiet, but real. Months later, the memory still lived in the space between us. Unspoken but present. At lunch with friends, his knee would bump mine under the table, and he wouldn't move it. Sometimes he'd reach for my hand in parking lots, quickly, like he wasn't sure it was allowed. Other times, he'd lean his head on my shoulder when no one was looking. And I'd let him. We hadn't told anyone. We didn't rush. We didn't define it with long explanations. It wasn't loud, but it was there. In the way he'd wait for me to walk beside him. In how he sat closer than he used to. In the small smile he gave me when our eyes met in quiet rooms. I used to think loving him out loud would break us. But maybe it was always meant to be something that grew slowly. Like the light after a fire goes out. Soft, warm, lasting. It's strange how something so quiet can change everything. Looking back now, it wasn't the night in the tent that changed us. Not really. It was the moments after. The choice to stay. To not run. To let something unfamiliar unfold without tearing it apart with questions or fear. We never made a big announcement. No dramatic confessions or bold declarations. We just lived. Gently, carefully. Choosing each other in small, consistent ways. Some days it still felt uncertain. We'd stumble. We'd get quiet. But then he'd reach for my hand, or I'd catch him watching me with that look he probably thought I didn't notice. And I'd remember that night under the stars. How still everything felt. How real. We weren't perfect. We weren't always sure. But we were honest. And that made all the difference. Because love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it's just a hand under the sleeping bag. A voice in the dark saying, I want to try. And someone whispering back, me too. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt something you were too scared to say out loud, know you're not alone. Sometimes love speaks in silence, in glances, in the spaces we share without words. Have you ever had a moment like this, quiet, powerful, unforgettable? Share it in the comments. Your story might help someone else find the courage to feel. And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country below. I'd love to know how far this story travels. If this touched your heart, like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. Stories about longing, vulnerability, and the love we almost didn't admit. See you in the next one.